Today we're here to talk about how to tighten a loose headset, something that's fairly common and fairly straightforward. When we talk about a headset, the bearings are the headset. So there's going to be two of them. Most of these modern bikes, one is going to live inside of the frame at the top and the other at the bottom, and they're there so that we can turn our handlebars nice and smoothly. Like any bearing, if it's too loose, there can be some play that develops, and if it's too tight, there can be some binding. So we want to find that perfect balance where it's loose enough for us to turn freely, but we're not getting any play in the headset. Quite straightforward. We only really need one tool, sometimes two, depending on the size of the bolts on your top cap and your stem bolts. So this bike here has a 4mm and a 5mm. And then just to be extra sure at the end, we are going to use a torque wrench just to make sure that everything's tightened to the proper spec. The symptoms of a loose headset are some knocking noises, some rattling, especially when you're going over bumps and whatnot. The easiest way to check that is to just grab the front brake and rock the bike back and forward. If you feel some movement in the front end, chances are you probably have a loose headset. So as I'm rocking this back and forth, I can feel the movement. We're looking at the headset cap and the top of the frame here. And as I'm moving back and forth, it's moving back and forth as well. This bike we purposely loosened, so there's quite a bit of movement, but the concept will be the same no matter how loose it is. Another way that you can check is to just kind of pinch the front and the back, right where the frame meets here, and just rock it back and forth. And it's a lot easier to feel the movement than it is to see it. So this bike has quite a bit, like I had mentioned. A closer look at what's going on here. This is a fork, and this is the piece that's inside of the frame. The stem and the top cap are what's going to pull these two bearings closer together to get them nice and tight. To illustrate here, this stem right now is tight, and this top cap, as I tighten it, is what's going to pull everything together. Now, these two bolts here are clamping the stem onto the fork, and when these are tight, no matter how much I tighten this top cap, it's not going to move because it's clamped into place. So before we make any headset adjustments, the first thing that we need to do is loosen these two clamps so that the stem will slide down the fork, or the steer tube as this part is, and then we can make the adjustments. So once these are loose, this part will now slide down and compress the bearings together. Now, just as we can't make any adjustments with this tight, if there is extra space on the top of the steer tube, this top cap isn't going to be able to push down on the headset spacer. So we need to make sure that A, we have enough spacer showing, and B, this is loose before we make any adjustments. So as we had mentioned, this bike's quite loose. If I kind of do the drop test, maybe you guys can hear that rattling that we're getting. As I'm going over bumps, I'm feeling all this extra play. The nice thing about this process is that you actually don't need a bike stand. I do this on the ground. Even if I have access to a stand, you just have a lot better of a feel for what's going on here. So the stem bolts here have a 4mm, so I need to loosen this clamp and the other clamp evenly. I like to go back and forth just so we're not putting all the stress on one bolt. So just a couple turns there, and now as we make adjustments to the top cap, it's going to pull everything together. That stem is going to be able to slide down the steer tube. So what I like to do is just tighten this bolt until it's about finger tight. And then I'll go back here, grab the front brake, grab the frame right here, and rock back and forth and feel for play. So I actually am still feeling a little bit of play on this bike, so I'm just going to go a little bit tighter. And the reason I like to start loose and work my way tight is that you can over tighten these. This bolt doesn't have a torque spec because it's different on every bike, on every headset. And this is more of a trial and error or something that you'll do by feel. So we're close. It's much tighter than it was, but there's still a little bit of play. I'm just going to do another quarter or half a turn. And again, trial and error. We're going to feel back and forth. There's just ever so slightly some play. So I'm going to go just a hair more. And this is the sort of thing where you really just want to go just a smidge past where you stop feeling play. So if I were to keep going, those bearings would be compressed too much. There would be some binding. Those bearings are going to wear out a little bit faster. And if you lift the bike and you go to turn the front wheel, if there's a stiff feeling there, chances are that the headset is too tight. So I've gone back and forth. I've felt that everything's good. Now the next step is to make sure the handlebars are aligned. As these have been loosened, we can twist them independently of the front wheel. So I just, by eye, visually line everything up. You can do a little tap if you want to do small adjustments. And once it's lined up, The last part of this is to just tighten up these bolts. So the same way that we loosen them evenly, we're gonna tighten them evenly back and forth. Almost every stem will say the torque spec they want for these on the side of it. 6 Newton meters is generally where they are. Some are a little different, be sure to check. So I've got these tight enough to where, nothing's gonna move, but I haven't really cranked down on these. So the next thing I'm gonna do is just grab my torque wrench. Okay, and I'm gonna set it to 6 Newton meters. And I felt it click after just a little bit of turn. I'm gonna go to the other side and the click. And with the clamps, there's 2 bolts here, so I like to just confirm back and forth 2 times. I got the click and the click, and we're good. So as you can tell, it's quite a simple process, especially if everything's in good working order. If you have changed out the stem or the fork recently, this process can be a little bit different and there's some things that you might need to troubleshoot. But most of the time when you buy a new bike, all of the parts are compatible, everything's gonna go together well. And yeah, straightforward.